The grand hall of the Vareth Empire could hold 10,000 supplicants and still feel empty. Empress Zarathul Vey sat on her throne of living crystal, watching the assembled nobility arrange themselves in perfect hierarchical order, and felt the familiar weight of 300 years settling on her shoulders. Today would be theater, display of power, reminder to the 400 worlds under her rule that resistance was futile and justice was absolute. Today, they would finally see a human. The prisoner was escorted by 12 guards, excessive for a single captive, but protocol demanded overwhelming force. The creature walked upright despite the neural chains binding its wrists, each step measured and controlled. Its armor was a patchwork nightmare of salvaged components, Vareth plating poorly modified to fit, human technology jury-rigged with Kelton power cells, all held together by what looked like primitive welding and desperate improvisation. The armor bore the marks of hard use, carbon scoring from plasma fire, dents from kinetic impacts, scratches and gouges that suggested close combat with blade weapons. This creature had survived battles that should have killed it. Zarathul leaned forward slightly, her blade ridges flexing with interest. Humans were classified as vermin, scavengers, thieves, guerrilla fighters who struck from shadows and fled from honorable combat. The Empire had spent 50 years trying to eradicate them with the same determination one might apply to an infestation. Yet they persisted. Worse, they were becoming effective. "Present the prisoner," she commanded, her voice carrying across the vast hall without effort. The guards forced the human to its knees at the base of the throne dais. It complied without resistance but without submission either, movement suggesting it was choosing to kneel rather than being forced. The distinction was subtle but significant. Lord Commander Vekran stepped forward, his blade ridges fully extended in display of military authority. "Your Radiance, we present the human terrorist designated Target 17, captured during a raid on Supply Depot Heth 7. Intelligence suggests command-level status within the resistance structure." "Identity?" Zarathul asked. "Unknown. The creature refuses interrogation." "All creatures talk eventually." "This one has endured 3 days of neural stimulation without breaking. Our interrogators suggest enhanced resistance, possibly cybernetic augmentation." Zarathul studied the kneeling figure. The armor revealed nothing. Its helmet was a featureless shell, scarred and dented, giving no indication of what lay beneath. Could these humans truly be cybernetically enhanced? Intelligence had never confirmed it, but their resilience suggested something beyond natural capability. "You are charged with attacks on Imperial facilities, theft of military resources, and coordination of terrorist activities against the Vareth Empire," she announced formally. "You will provide the locations of your bases, the identities of your commanders, and complete intelligence on resistance operations. Cooperation will result in swift execution. Refusal will result in extensive persuasion followed by execution." The human remained silent. "Do you understand the charges?" "Nothing." Zarathul felt her blade ridges rise in irritation. She'd adjudicated thousands of these proceedings over her long reign. Most criminals begged for mercy. Warriors demanded honorable execution. Political dissidents gave speeches. This creature simply existed. Kneeling in chains, utterly silent as if the proceedings were happening to someone else. "Why did you attack our supply depot?" she demanded, abandoning formal protocol. "Silence. Speak or we'll remove pieces until you do." The human's helmet tilted slightly, not fear but acknowledgement. Still no words. Lord Commander Vekran stepped closer, drawing his ceremonial blade. "Your Radiance, permit me to encourage cooperation." Zarathul waved permission, curious to see if pain would succeed where threats had failed. The blade moved with practiced precision, finding a gap in the armor plating and drawing a line of blood across the human's arm. Not deep, a warning cut meant to demonstrate vulnerability. The prisoner flinched slightly but made no sound. Vekran struck again, harder. The armor plate cracked, blood flowed more freely. The human's breathing changed, faster, harder, but still no cry, no plea, no sound of pain. Remarkable pain tolerance, Vekrin observed, stepping back. Either augmented or trained beyond normal biological limits. Zarathul descended from her throne, circling the kneeling prisoner. She'd heard reports about human resilience, about their irritating refusal to die properly, but seeing it directly was different. This was not bravery. Bravery was facing death with honor. This was something else, cold endurance like a machine continuing to function despite damage. "Are you even sentient?" she asked, genuinely curious now. "Or are you some biological weapon, programmed to resist and fight without thought?" For the first time, the prisoner moved beyond simple adjustment. Its shoulders straightened. Its helmet turned to track her movement, following her with attention that suggested active intelligence rather than automatic response. So, not a machine, something aware, choosing silence rather than being incapable of speech. "You surrendered," she said, remembering the intelligence report. "Your squad escaped and you walked into custody willingly. Why?" Silence, but the prisoner's posture shifted again, subtle tension, as if the question had landed. "Intelligence reports suggest you could have escaped," Zarathul continued, moving to stand directly before the kneeling human. "You possessed transport, you had tactical advantage, yet you stayed, allowed capture, sacrificed yourself so others could flee." She paused, studying the inscrutable helmet. That suggests either profound loyalty or profound stupidity. The hall waited. The assembled nobility watched with the fascinated attention of spectators at a blood sport. The guards stood ready to respond to any threat, and the human remained kneeling, silent, its armor battered and bloody, its intentions unknown. Zarathul made a decision that surprised even herself. She was tired of looking at metal and wondering what hid beneath. Tired of interrogating a helmet rather than a face. Tired of fighting an enemy she'd never truly seen. "Remove your helmet," she commanded. "Let us see what manner of beast has been terrorizing our supply lines." The prisoner's hands, still chained, moved slowly to the helmet seals. The hall fell completely silent. 300 years of Veyrath dominance, 50 years of war with vermin-classified enemies, centuries of assumption about what humans were and what they represented, all about to be tested. The seals released with a soft hiss. The prisoner lifted the helmet clear, setting it carefully on the crystal floor beside him with movements that suggested respect for the space despite being captive in it. And Empress Zarathul Vey, who had seen 1,000 species kneel before her throne, who had conquered 400 worlds and commanded fleets that cracked planets, found herself staring at something she hadn't expected. A face, not a monster, not a beast, not a biological weapon or cybernetic construct, just a human face, young and old simultaneously, marked by exhaustion and scars, framed by dark hair cut short for practical reasons. His skin was darker than Veyrath crimson, some shade between bronze and brown that spoke of genetics she didn't understand. His features were soft by warrior standards, no blade ridges, no armored plates, no natural weapons at all. But his eyes were calm, intelligent, completely unafraid, and they met hers directly without submission or defiance, just steady observation that suggested he was cataloging everything, the hall, the nobles, the Empress herself, for purposes she couldn't guess. "My name is Captain Nathaniel Cross," he said, his voice rough but steady, speaking Veyrath with adequate pronunciation. "Terran Resistance, 4th Battalion, and I have nothing else to say." The hall remained frozen. Because after 50 years of fighting shadows and ghosts, after decades of calling humans vermin and scavengers, after centuries of Veyrath superiority and certainty, they'd finally seen their enemy's face. And it looked terrifyingly, incomprehensibly human. The murmuring spread through the hall like fire through dry grass. Nobles leaned toward each other, whispering observations and theories. Guards shifted uncomfortably, hands on weapons, uncertain whether this revelation changed threat assessment. Zarathul stood perfectly still, maintaining imperial composure while her mind processed information that contradicted 50 years of assumptions. This was what her empire had been fighting. This small, soft creature with no natural defenses, no visible enhancements, no physical advantages whatsoever. "You speak our language," she observed, because saying something, anything, was better than standing in shocked silence. "I've had 50 years to learn it," Nathaniel replied. "Your empire talks a lot." A dangerous sound rippled through the assembled court, something between shock and laughter, quickly suppressed when nobles remembered they were supposed to be outraged by prisoner insolence. Zarathul's blade ridges rose slightly. "You mock us while kneeling in chains." "I'm stating facts. Your military broadcasts aren't encrypted. Your commanders monologue during battles. You announce your strategies to prove your honor." He shifted his weight slightly, chains clinking. "It's tactically inefficient but very educational." Lord Commander Vecran's hand moved to his blade. "Your Radiance, this creature shows insufficient respect." "Let it speak," Zarathul interrupted, still studying Nathaniel's face. "I wish to understand what we've been fighting." She descended the final steps, circling him slowly, examining this impossible contradiction. Up close, the signs of hard use were more apparent, scars on his face and neck, the way he held himself with soldiers' discipline despite obvious exhaustion, the controlled breathing of someone managing pain. "You are small," she said, meaning it as clinical observation. "Barely 2 meters. You have no natural weapons, no claws, no blade ridges, no venom, no armored plates. Your skin is soft. Your bones are fragile. Your species has no unity that we can detect, no central command, no honor codes that govern warfare." She stopped in front of him. "Yet intelligence reports suggest you personally led raids that destroyed 3 of our supply depots, rescued captured resistance fighters from detention centers, and once held a defensive position for 14 hours against overwhelming force. Explain this impossibility." Nathaniel met her gaze directly, another breach of protocol that had guards tensing. "We're human. We don't need natural weapons because we make better ones. We don't need unity because we're too stubborn to accept defeat even when we're alone. And we don't need your honor codes because we write our own. Your armor is salvaged trash. Your trash mostly, we're recyclers." A slight smile crossed his face. "Also, calling it trash after it's kept me alive through 50 battles seems like poor tactical assessment." Zarathul felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, genuine confusion mixed with reluctant respect. This creature should be cowering or begging or raging. Instead, he was conversational, treating capture and interrogation like a tactical debriefing between professionals. "Why did you surrender?" she asked. "Our intelligence suggests you had means to escape with your squad." "I did." "Then why remain?" "Your fleet was positioning to bombard 3 civilian settlements my squad had been operating near. Non-combatants, families, children, people who'd helped us but weren't part of the resistance." He shifted again, and she noticed fresh blood seeping through his armor where Vecran had struck him. "I surrendered in exchange for their safety." "Your commander agreed. They evacuated. Mission accomplished." "You traded yourself for civilians." "That's what leaders do. We go last. We make sure everyone else gets out first." He paused. "Don't your leaders do the same?" The question landed like a blade between Zarathul's ridges. Vayreth leaders fought at the front, that was their honor code, but sacrificed themselves for non-combatants. That was unthinkable, weakness, failure to maintain dominance. "We do not bargain with vermin," Lord Commander Vecran announced. "The human lies. We made no such agreement." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Then you're about to have a diplomatic problem, because human resistance cells recorded the entire negotiation. If those civilians were harmed, the footage gets distributed to every conquered species in your empire. Let them see how Veyrath honor works." The threat was delivered calmly, factually, and it made Zarathul's blade ridges flatten in grudging admiration. Captured, chained, bleeding, and this creature still had contingency plans. The civilians were evacuated as agreed, she confirmed, shooting Vecran a look that promised later conversation about unauthorized negotiations. Your sacrifice was accepted with honor. Good, Nathaniel relaxed slightly. Then, like I said, mission accomplished. Whatever you do to me doesn't change that. Zarathul circled him again, trying to understand the tactical mind behind those calm eyes. You believe you've won. I saved people who needed saving. By my definition, that's winning. You will die in our custody. Eventually. He shrugged, an oddly human gesture that conveyed resignation and acceptance simultaneously. We all die eventually. At least mine will mean something. You could escape. Humans have escaped our facilities before. And risk your forces retaliating against the settlements I saved. No. I'll stay, refuse your interrogation, and die knowing I kept my word. He looked directly at her. That's how honor works in my species. We keep our promises, even when it costs us everything. The hall had gone completely quiet. Because this small, fragile creature chained at the base of the throne had just delivered a lecture on honor to the most powerful military empire in 400 systems. And somehow, impossible as it seemed, he'd made them listen. Zarathul stood before Nathaniel, studying his face, the exhaustion, the resolve, the complete absence of fear. She'd interrogated thousands of prisoners over her long reign. Most broke within hours. Warriors lasted days. Political idealists sometimes managed weeks. This human seemed prepared to last indefinitely, not through augmentation or training, but through simple, stubborn refusal to cooperate. You will tell us the locations of your bases, she said, one final attempt at traditional interrogation. No, I won't. We will torture you. Probably, I'll still say no. We will execute you. Eventually. But that doesn't get you what you want. He met her eyes steadily. Your Majesty, I've already accomplished what I came here to do. The rest is just waiting. She should kill him. Tradition demanded it. He was a terrorist, a resistance leader, an enemy who'd killed Veyrath soldiers and destroyed imperial property. Executing him publicly would reinforce her power, demonstrate the futility of resistance, send a message to every conquered world. Instead, she found herself saying, confine him to secure quarters, level 3 containment, medical attention for his wounds. I'll decide his fate after considering the matter further. The hall erupted in shock. Secure quarters. Medical attention, for vermin. Lord Commander Vecran's blade ridges extended fully. Your Radiance, this is highly irregular. My reign, my decisions, Commander. Her voice carried absolute authority. The human will be held in comfort while I determine proper response. This audience is concluded. She turned and ascended to her throne without looking back, but she could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her back, confused, shocked, questioning. As guards escorted Nathaniel from the hall, helmet replaced, she caught one final glimpse of him. He walked with the same controlled precision as when he'd entered, showing neither gratitude nor relief at the stay of execution. Just patient endurance. And Zarathul realized, uncomfortable and fascinated in equal measure, that for the first time in 3 centuries, something had genuinely surprised her. She'd expected a monster beneath that helmet. Instead, she'd found something far more dangerous, a human being. The secure quarters were absurd by prisoner standards. Nathaniel had spent time in Veyrath detention facilities before, during previous escapes that intelligence apparently knew about, and they were typically bare cells with minimal life support. This was a suite. Bedroom, sitting area, bathroom with actual water fixtures. A viewing window that overlooked the orbital dock, where Veyrath warships came and went in careful formations. They'd even provided a data terminal, though access was heavily restricted and obviously monitored. He stood at the window, watching a destroyer execute a docking maneuver that could have been 20% more efficient if they'd approached from a different vector. Professional observation, nothing he could use, but old habits died hard. The door opened without announcement. He didn't turn. If they were here to kill him, turning wouldn't help. Your fleet movements are inefficient, he said, watching the destroyer complete its unnecessarily complex docking sequence. 3 unnecessary course corrections. A competent helm officer could save 15 minutes per docking cycle. You're analyzing our military operations while imprisoned. The voice was unmistakable, the Empress herself, without escort or guards, speaking with something that might have been amusement. Nathaniel turned slowly. Empress Zarathul stood in the doorway, wearing simpler robes than her formal court regalia, her blade ridges in neutral position. Without the throne and the audience, she looked younger. Still ancient by human standards, something about her eyes suggested centuries, but less like a monument and more like a person. "I'm bored," he said honestly. "And you left the window unshielded. Not my fault if I notice things. Most prisoners spend their time contemplating escape or death. I've already decided I'm not escaping, honor-bound to stay, and death will come when it comes. Worrying about it seems inefficient." He gestured to the window. "So I critique your logistics instead. It's oddly satisfying." She moved into the room, the door closing behind her with a soft hiss. "You're an unusual human, Captain Cross." "I'm a fairly standard human. You've just never met one of us outside combat conditions." He limped slightly toward the sitting area. Vekran's blade strike had done more damage than he'd admitted, and gestured to chairs, an invitation that was absurd given she was Empress and he was prisoner. "Did you come to interrogate me, or are you just curious?" "Both." She sat, studying him with those ancient eyes. "I wish to understand what we've been fighting for 50 years. You want the short version, or the version with historical context?" "I have time." Nathaniel sat across from her, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his injury. "Humans evolved on a planet that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. We're not the strongest species Earth produced, not even close. We're not the fastest or the most well-armed. We survived because we learned to adapt, to cooperate, and to absolutely refuse to quit even when quitting made sense. Stubbornness as evolutionary advantage." "Exactly. When your empire arrived and declared Earth part of your territory, we did what we always do when faced with superior force. We adapted. Learned your technology, studied your tactics, found your weaknesses." He leaned back carefully. "You call us vermin because we don't fight the way you expect, but that's the point. We fight to win, not to satisfy someone else's definition of honor." Zarathul's blade ridges shifted. Irritation or interest, he couldn't tell yet. "You speak as if honor is negotiable." "Honor is cultural. What you call honorable combat, we call predictable tactics. What we call strategic flexibility, you call cowardice." He shrugged. "Neither is wrong. They're just different values born from different evolutionary pressures. And what values drive humans to continue fighting when defeat is inevitable?" "Is it inevitable?" Nathaniel met her eyes. "You've been trying to exterminate us for 50 years. We're still here. Our population is growing. Our technology is advancing through reverse engineering your equipment. Every year, we get harder to kill. That doesn't sound like inevitable defeat to me." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "You truly believe you can win?" "I believe we can outlast you. There's a difference." He shifted position, wincing slightly. "Humans are very good at outlasting things. Ice ages, plagues, predators, our own stupidity. We just keep going. It's annoying, I'm told." That surprised a sound from her that might have been a laugh. "You find humor in this?" "In the absurdity of me sitting in comfortable quarters discussing military theory with the Empress who's probably going to execute me. Yeah, that's pretty funny." His expression sobered. "Or I can sit here afraid and angry, which doesn't change anything but makes the waiting worse. I prefer funny." Over the following days, the visits became routine. Zarathul would arrive without announcement. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Human history and Veyrath culture, tactical theory and philosophical differences, the experience of leadership and the weight of impossible decisions. She asked about Earth's wars, expecting brutality to match her assumptions about human nature. Instead, he described conflicts that taught humanity the cost of hatred, the value of rebuilding, the hard-learned lesson that winning a war meant nothing if you destroyed everything worth protecting. "We've made terrible mistakes," he admitted during one conversation. "Genocides, nuclear weapons, environmental destruction. We nearly killed ourselves a dozen times before we reached the stars, but we learned. Each mistake taught us something, and we adapted. Your species sounds exhausting." "We absolutely are. We exhaust ourselves regularly." He smiled. "But we're also capable of remarkable things when we stop fighting each other. Art, music, literature, science. We've produced beauty alongside brutality. That's the human condition, constantly at war with our own worst impulses." She told him about Veyrath history, about a warrior species that had conquered through strength and maintained dominance through fear, about the pride of never knowing defeat, of building an empire on the principle that might made right. "And how's that working out?" Nathaniel asked. "We control 400 worlds. You occupy 400 worlds. There's a difference." He leaned forward despite the pain it caused. "How many of those worlds are loyal because they want to be versus because they're afraid of you? How many would rebel if they thought they could win?" "That's the point, they can't win. Until they can. Empires built on fear fall eventually. It's a historical constant across every species I've studied. The question isn't if, it's when." He paused. "And whether the fall is violent or whether the empire evolves into something sustainable." The conversations grew deeper, more personal. She admitted the exhaustion of 3-century rule, the isolation of being the most powerful being in 400 systems with no one to confide in. He talked about the loneliness of command, of sending people into battles knowing some wouldn't return, of carrying the weight of every loss. "You understand," she said one evening, sounding surprised. "I'm human, not alien to the concept of responsibility." He smiled slightly. "Leaders are leaders. The species doesn't change the fundamental loneliness of it. My court would be scandalized to hear me admit weakness to a prisoner. Good thing I'm not going to tell them." He met her eyes. "For what it's worth, I don't think it's weakness. I think it's honesty. Those are different things." 3 weeks into his captivity, she asked the question that had been building. "Why did you truly surrender? Give me the real reason." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the stars. "Because those civilians trusted us. They fed us when they had nothing, hid us from your patrols, risked their lives to help the resistance, and when your fleet showed up to make examples of them." He turned to face her. "I couldn't let them die for the crime of helping us. That's not what we fight for." Most commanders would sacrifice civilians for tactical advantage. Most commanders haven't spent 50 years watching their own people die because superior forces don't care about collateral damage. His voice was quiet but firm. "We fight to protect humans, all of them, even the ones who aren't soldiers, especially the ones who aren't soldiers." "That's," she struggled for words, "inefficient." "It's human, we're pack animals. We protect our own, even when it costs us strategically." He paused. "Don't Veyrath protect their civilians? We protect our strong. The weak are expected to survive or fail on their own merit." "That explains a lot about your military doctrine." He said it without judgment, just observation. Different values, different tactics. She studied him. This human who'd traded his freedom for non-combatants, who spoke about leadership and loss with understanding earned through experience, who somehow made captivity feel like conversation between equals rather than interrogation between enemy and prisoner. "You're not what I expected humans to be," she said finally. "Neither are you," he replied. "I expected a tyrant. I found someone who asks questions and listens to answers. That's rare in anyone, human or Veyrath." The words settled between them, honest and uncomfortable and true. Outside the window, Veyrath warships continued their inefficient docking patterns, and inside, 2 beings from species at war discovered something neither had anticipated. genuine understanding. It didn't change the war. It didn't erase 50 years of conflict, but it changed something fundamental in how they saw each other. And that, Nathaniel thought as the Empress left for another court obligation, might be more dangerous than any weapon either species possessed. Because it's easy to fight monsters, it's much harder to fight people you've learned to respect. The breakthrough came during week 4 of Nathaniel's captivity, though neither of them recognized it as such at first. Zarathul arrived at his quarters later than usual, her blade ridges tight with tension that suggested a difficult day. She sat without preamble, staring out at the stars with expression that Nathaniel had learned meant she was processing something complex. "Rebellion on Kelter 9, she said finally. "One of our colony worlds. The indigenous population has risen against imperial authority. Let me guess, your generals want orbital bombardment." Her look confirmed it. "And you're wondering if there's another option," Nathaniel continued, reading her expression. "Because bombardment works but creates martyrs, and martyrs inspire more rebellions. You speak from experience. Every human resistance cell was inspired by someone else's martyrdom. Your empire has created hundreds of them over 50 years. He leaned forward carefully. "What do the rebels want?" "Autonomy, self-governance, freedom from imperial oversight." She said it like the concepts were foreign, impossible demands. "Are they? You control 400 worlds. Does it really matter if Kelter 9 governs itself as long as they're not attacking you?" "It sets precedent. If one world achieves independence through rebellion, others will follow." "Yes, they will." Nathaniel met her eyes. "So you have a choice. You can crush this rebellion and spend the next century crushing every rebellion it inspires. Or you can negotiate, establish precedent that rebellion isn't necessary if grievances are addressed peacefully. That's weakness. That's evolution. Your empire is built on conquest. Maybe it's time to build on something more sustainable." She stared at him, blade ridges shifting through complex patterns. "You're suggesting I negotiate with rebels who attack imperial authority. I'm suggesting you talk to people who have grievances before those grievances require military response." He paused. "What would happen if you went to Kelter 9 yourself, not with a fleet but with willingness to listen?" "My generals would call it capitulation." "Your generals are thinking like conquerors. You're an empress. You get to think bigger." He smiled slightly. "Besides, showing up personally to negotiate takes more courage than sending warships. If you want to demonstrate the strength to choose peace." The conversation continued for hours, Nathaniel offering perspective from someone who'd spent decades fighting asymmetric warfare, understanding what drove rebellions and what could prevent them. Zarathul listened, argued, challenged, but slowly began to see possibilities beyond the binary of dominance or destruction. 3 days later, she made an announcement that shocked the empire. She would personally travel to Kelter 9 to meet with rebel leaders. Her court was horrified. Her generals were furious. Her security detail was frantic. But she went anyway, and Nathaniel watched from his quarters as the reports came in. Initial hostility giving way to cautious dialogue leading to negotiations resulting in an unprecedented agreement. Kelter 9 would remain part of the empire but with autonomous self-governance and representation in imperial councils. The rebellion ended without bloodshed. The empire was stunned. And across 400 worlds, conquered peoples began to wonder if change was actually possible. When Zarathul returned, she came directly to Nathaniel's quarters, still wearing travel robes, exhaustion evident in her posture. "It worked," she said, sitting heavily. "They're still loyal, still part of the empire, but governing themselves, keeping their resources, maintaining their culture." She looked at him. "This shouldn't have worked." "But it did. Because you were strong enough to try something different. My generals are calling it unprecedented weakness. Some are likely plotting my overthrow. Let them plot. You just prevented a war and kept a world loyal through respect instead of fear." That's not weakness, that's leadership evolution. He paused. How do you feel? Terrified, exhilarated, uncertain. A slight smile crossed her face. Alive. I feel alive for the first time in decades. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, and Nathaniel realized the dynamic between them had shifted somewhere along the weeks of conversation. She wasn't interrogator, and he wasn't prisoner anymore. They were something else, advisors maybe, friends possibly, two beings from species at war who'd found unexpected common ground. I'm releasing you, she said suddenly. Nathaniel turned, surprised. What? Keeping you serves no purpose beyond my own pride. You surrendered to save lives. Holding you doesn't honor that sacrifice. She stood, moving to face him directly. And you've given me something more valuable than intelligence or tactical information. You've given me perspective I desperately needed. Your court will call it weakness. Let them. I've spent 3 centuries proving strength through conquest. Maybe it's time I proved it through something else. She produced a data chip. Transport to neutral territory. From there, you can rejoin your resistance or return to Earth. Your choice. What happens to the war? I don't know, but I know our approach has been flawed. You're not vermin to be exterminated. Your opponent's worth respecting. Maybe even partners worth talking to. She paused, blade ridges shifting to a pattern he'd learned meant uncertainty. I'm calling a ceasefire. Opening diplomatic channels. It won't be popular and I have no guarantee your people will accept. If the offer is genuine. If it includes autonomy and reparations. Nathaniel stood, facing her as equal rather than prisoner. Humans are stubborn, but we're not stupid. We'd rather build than fight if given the choice. She extended her hand, a human gesture she'd learned from him. He took it and the contact was brief but significant. Will I see you again? She asked. Probably. Someone needs to make sure you don't backslide into the conquest thing. He smiled. Plus, someone should explain to your helm officers why their docking procedures are inefficient. That surprised a genuine laugh from her. You're insufferable. I'm human, it's our best feature. The release was processed quietly, without public announcement. One morning, Nathaniel simply walked out of the palace complex wearing civilian clothes, carrying a data chip with transit authorization, and headed for the nearest transport hub. 6 months later, he stood in a diplomatic conference room aboard a neutral station, representing human resistance interests in the first formal peace talks between humanity and the Veyrath Empire. Empress Zarathul sat across the table, surrounded by advisors who clearly hated this entire process, and met his eyes with expression that conveyed both exasperation and respect. Your opening proposal is unreasonable, she said formally. Your counteroffer is insulting, he replied, equally formal. Then both of them smiled slightly, acknowledging the theater, and the real negotiation began. It took 8 months to hammer out the first treaty. It was imperfect, filled with compromises that satisfied no one completely, requiring enforcement mechanisms that both sides viewed with suspicion. But it held. Veyrath forces withdrew from designated human territories. Human resistance cells ceased attacks on imperial facilities. Trade agreements were established. Cultural exchanges began tentatively. The war didn't end. 50 years of hatred couldn't dissolve in months, but it transformed into something new, something manageable. 1 year after Nathaniel's release, he received an encrypted message on a secure channel. Your helm efficiency report was actually helpful. Don't let it go to your head. Z. He sent back. I have 17 additional inefficiencies documented if you're interested. Also, your treaty compliance officers are doing well. Proud of you, N. The exchanges continued irregularly. Professional updates mixed with personal observations. Formal diplomatic communications seasoned with jokes that their respective staffs wouldn't understand. 2 years after the first treaty, Zarathul announced comprehensive imperial reforms, introducing concepts of autonomous governance to more worlds, establishing councils where conquered species could voice grievances peacefully. Some called it the beginning of the empire's end. Others called it evolution. She called it necessary, and when her generals objected too strenuously, she reminded them that she'd spent 3 centuries proving her strength through conquest and had nothing left to prove. 3 years in, Nathaniel stood in the same grand hall where he'd once knelt in chains, now attending a formal signing ceremony for the Third Treaty expansion. The hall looked the same, vast, intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small. But he wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was Earth's official liaison to the Veyrath Empire, standing as equal among the assembled delegates. Zarathul caught his eye from her throne and gave the smallest nod, acknowledgement, respect, maybe even affection. After the ceremony, in a private moment away from advisors and guards, she asked him the question that had been building for years. Do you think we'll succeed, building peace from this much history of war? I think we're trying. That's more than either of our species has done before. He paused. Besides, we're both too stubborn to quit now. Stubbornness as diplomatic advantage. Exactly. Humans aren't the only ones who can refuse to give up. She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine, the expression of someone who'd learned that strength came in many forms and the strongest choice was often the hardest one. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For showing me that the strongest empires aren't built on fear. For teaching me that seeing enemies as potential allies takes more courage than any battle. She paused. For being stubborn enough to treat me like a person instead of a throne. You're welcome, though for the record you did the hard part. I just asked annoying questions. You're the one who had courage to listen. 5 years after that first meeting in chains, Nathaniel stood in the memorial gardens on Veyrath Prime, a new addition to the capital, dedicated to casualties from both sides of the 50-year war. His name appeared on a plaque among human resistance fighters, listed as Captain Nathaniel Cross, warrior, diplomat, bridge builder. Zarathul's name appeared nearby, under a different heading, Empress Zarathul Vey, the Crimson Sovereign who chose peace. They stood together in the garden, 2 beings from species that had spent half a century trying to destroy each other, now working to build something sustainable from the wreckage. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd executed you that first day? She asked. Probably someone else would have eventually made you ask the same questions, maybe with less efficiency critique and fewer terrible jokes. I doubt it, you're uniquely irritating. High praise from an empress. She laughed, and the sound carried across the memorial garden where names of the fallen were carved in stone and crystal, Veyrath and human, side by side, honored equally. What happens now? She asked. We keep trying, we keep building, we keep reminding each other that strength includes knowing when to show mercy. He looked at the names around them. And we remember that every person on these walls chose to fight because they believed in something worth protecting. Our job is making sure their sacrifices meant something. By building peace instead of continuing war. Exactly. It's harder than fighting. It's slower and messier and requires more patience than any battle.